And we are live on Oz Property Investors. We bring the big names, and tonight we only have two of us, so we couldn't fit Joe on the podcast or the live today. So today we're gonna reveal when is it time to move from residential into commercial. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But Joe and I were talking about this the other day, and we said, well, the answer is probably you have to stay tuned to see what the answer was. But now we're going to talk to that, and it's an AMA. So if you have questions, comments, or just want to throw some shade at Palise and his beautiful beard, then please do that. But no, jump on and throw your questions. This is the first time we've done an AMA, and we're going to be revealing one of Steve's favorite properties this year. So there'll be an actual deal that we'll be looking at and the location, all information. So I don't know how we're going to do this, Steve, but how are you going anyway? What's happening?
I'm good, man. Thanks for coming to the Christmas party last week. It was good to weirdly meet you in person for the first time ever, which is weird because I've been talking to you for like 3 years now, 4 years.
I'm not artificial intelligence. I do exist apparently, and apparently I can lawn bowl as well. So yeah, it's going to be. I'm excited to. The reason why I was excited to have this session is because it's a lot of, and I saw the interest on residential, and we saw so many questions, similar questions asked, and really great questions. So we wanted to do what would Steve do, and I'm going to push Steve to pick a couple of favorites, and then I'll do the connections because he does. But I want to know, Steve, like, how is it looking going into the year's end? Like, are you busy? Like, or are you sort of seeing people sort of shut up shop? Like, what's it looking like?
No, a bit of both. The stock's starting to dry up a little bit, but it's probably the last push this week and next week before basically there's going to be less deals from mid-December to mid-January because you'd be silly to put it for market. However, it doesn't mean stop looking though, because anything that's still on the market, you're just going with a slight low ball and see if you can kind of pick up some good value. Which weirdly though, I tell people don't actually stress about that, because I know in residential how important it is to kind of save 20, 30 grand on a purchase. But in commercial, in the long run, I would rather pay the 20, 30 grand and get a quality asset and own it 6 months prior, because you'll make it back in cash flow.
Sorry, I muted myself. And the reason I suppose I asked that, because we were talking before about do you need to, because people, you had that little special on your thing, half price service, and you said you've been quite busy, which is just interesting that people are sort of making that decision towards the back end of the year. But what was stopping them, I suppose, in your either your September, October? Like, you're starting to get a bit of last minute rush, people signing up to buy commercial, or
it's got nothing to do with the actual market or their investing. It's just stupidly the human psyche. We just love a bargain. Like, I've been signing up 10 mil clients, and they've waited to save a little bit on the engagement fee. Like, it's just part of all those people probably would have signed up, but 6 months later, but people just need a little bit of a kick up the bum. We all fall for it as well. I go to the shops and I'm buying oat milk or whatever because I'm a hipster, obviously. And then you see the little special sign. It's like $2 for this one, $3, and you grab the $2 one just naturally. So it's just human psyche. My social media team worry about that. I just do what I'm telling them to, and my job's to get the good properties.
Exactly. That's what you do. Keep it simple. So for those of you who haven't been around and haven't seen his glorious beard, you are the head of Palise Property, or owner apparently as well. I mean, I like the word head, but you've got your mathematical and analytical skills. So you're an engineer, you're a chartered civil engineer and structural design as well. That sounds like fun. And now I don't know, you've quite hit the 2,000 plus purchase, but that's what I'm billing you as a team. I reckon you've done 2,000 plus now, haven't you?
I think we're over 2,000 now as a whole, because as Palise Property, we've done over 1,000 now. And previously, when I was at Rethink Investing, my last employer, we were at like 1,500, 1,600. So I think we're pretty damn close.
Wow. So I've done 2,000 plus, and you're always on the vlogs, and I always compliment you on your YouTube as well. So, but I wanted to throw a bit of a curveball, a bit of an ask before we get into, well, what are the things that people need to consider when sort of starting in commercial? But I want to know, what is your favorite commercial asset at the moment?
It depends on who's buying, but for me, I really like retail at the moment, suburban retail. Because most people are looking at industrial. So I think there's some good value to be had because everyone wants because industrial is the lowest risk. There's less moving parts, and I can show you some deals later if you want as well with retail. There's way more moving parts with it, but at the moment you can actually get higher yields. So while everyone's kind of ignoring that, I'm looking at that. But I've also got a large portfolio, so I'm diversifying there. But to answer your question, go industrial if you're starting out because it's the simplest. You've got somewhat comparables compared to like residential where you got like 3-bedroom house. You've sort of got square meter rates you can kind of make sense of. But retail goes out the window because it's all about foot traffic and road traffic.
Yeah, okay. So you're seeing a bit of value in the retail space, but that's probably a bit more an advanced play from what I'm hearing.
Again, depends. It depends what you're buying because there's more risk in regards to vacancy because vacancies are longer. So like on average, the stuff we buy, if you lose a retail tenant, you're probably talking 6 months to 18 months. So like there's a big chunk of vacancy there. However, the average tenancy period for the stuff we buy is kind of 10 to 20 years because while the business is successful, they stay there. So like they don't open, like a warehouse tenant will go to a larger warehouse because logistically it's cheaper to have one location. Whereas a medical center or a hair salon or a cafe, they open another premise. So you've got the business for the life of that business. And even if the owner wants to sell, they'll sell it and it'll kind of stay on. So you can have the tenant for longer, but the vacancy rates are longer. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword where if you buy like a $1 million industrial, they're going to be there on average like 5 to 10 years, depending on where it is. But they're going to leave every 5 to 10 years. And then the vacancy period is going to be 1 to 3 months. So it's the same net result. But again, there's no fit out costs. The leases aren't as long. They don't want as big a security. So it's just case by case, which I bet you I'm going to say case by case. And it depends about 1,000 times on these questions, but I'll try to answer it without them.
If you want to really pressure him, make sure you sort of hold him. And I'll bring up some of these comments as we're going as well. But it's interesting you kind of say that because I tend to agree. Like if you've got the suburban hairdresser, or the hairdresser's been there and they've got their clients and they've got the fit out and it's just, or the dentist, like they've been there for so long, they just if the dentist moves, it's harder for the person. They say, oh, now I've got to go 3 suburbs over or 5 suburbs over. I'll just go and find a dentist that's closer to me. It's that convenience factor. So I tend to agree. But then eventually, once they do turn over, you're going to then, you may have vacancy to find somebody to fit that. Is it because it's more a specialized sort of premises as well? Is that kind of why they're taking for a bit?
So if the people remember on the last time I was on, I actually showed the little shopping center I bought, which actually has a hairdresser in it. That there's no hairdresser for about a 2-kilometer radius. So you've encapsulated that whole suburban one. So while people still need their haircut, that hairdresser is going to survive in some form. What you can do, the levers you can pull to make sure you keep them is if obviously the business is struggling somewhat because it's poor owner, they'll most likely sell it really, really cheap. And then the new owner will pay the market rent and it keeps going that way. But that area is always going to need a hairdresser. Like you said, there's circumstances where they might leave, and then that's where you have the longer period of vacancy that you need fill. But that's what I mentioned before about like buying retail. You have to understand like the different businesses and how to get the foot traffic. And you wouldn't put like 2 hairdressers in the same complex. You'd actually get like a cafe, a medical. There's the food works in my one. Like you get to diversify the types of tenants, so it brings all the foot traffic.
Nice. Okay, let's get into it because for the person who's new to commercial, and I know we did the 80-20 of commercial investing, but if you are sort of, because this is the thing, there was a fear around, oh, it's a bigger asset, I don't know much about it. If you're starting off, what are the core kind of, I mean, I know you hate 3 to 5 things, but what are the main things people need to be aware of with commercial? We've talked about vacancy rates and longer tenancies, but what are those kind of core things that people should be aware of?
Okay, do you mean core as in probably things to watch out for in regards to negative? I can answer that quite easily.
Well, my next question was going to be about the biggest risks. So, I mean, I suppose to me, the differences between residential versus commercial is probably the first part of my question. And then I'll throw into...
Right. So let's start off. I'll go, like I know I've covered a lot of times in the podcast. We'll go over like key differences and then even like why commercial sort of might be right for you. And I know we've got a few questions on that, so I'll keep it kind of high level because there's some good questions coming. Anyone watching as well, anytime I say an answer for one of the questions, if you want a little sub question or you disagree, just write it and I can try to kind of converse with you that way. But main thing with commercial is benefits are it's got 3 times typically the cash flow of residential, because you start talking 5.5 to 7% net yields. At the moment, most Resi's 4% gross. If you're lucky, 4.5. If you go really, really regional, maybe 5. When that 4.5 gets eroded by council rates, water rates, maintenance, all things. So it ends up being like a 2.5% net yield. And then we're talking 6 to 7% net for commercial. So you get 3 times the commercial, 3 times the cash flow. The difference is the variety of stuff you need to look at. Like most people in this group, I've been in this group a long time, they're not buying off the plan apartments and things like that, or high density apartments. Most understand you need something with a land component. So they're buying 3 or 4 bedroom houses. And there's lots of data you can get from that in regards to vacancy rates, days on market, all that type of stuff. Even the comparable price, you can look at, cool, what did the one down the street sell for? What did the one around the corner sell for? And make some sense of it. Commercial, there's different tiers. You even go something that's similar like industrial. A 200 square meter warehouse has different kind of rates to a 800 square meter warehouse, which has different to 5,000. Then there's mezzanines and office spaces, and there's all these moving parts with it, which is also comes into the negative if you don't know how to analyze it. But generally, same capital growth, 3 times the cash flow. Why would you not buy?
Can I just because this is the thing that people they say, particularly in a higher interest rate environment. You mentioned the 3 times of residential, because they say, well, yeah, like it used to be able to. I can't get the numbers to stack up because interest rates are 6 and 7%, and if my net yield is 5% or 5 or 5.5, 6%, whatever it is, like I'm not making money from it. And I kind of, I sort of hang back when I see that, because but how do you kind of tackle that question? Because when interest rates were 2 and 3%, yeah, sure, I'm making money. But how do you think about that anyway?
I'm laughing because I get asked that every single day. People go, why would I buy commercial? It's nowhere near as cash flow positive as it. But then the funny thing is they go off and buy residential, which is a third the cash flow. So they've been like, I don't want to buy.
But I get more growth. I get more growth though, Steve. I get growth.
That's one of the questions we'll go into. But they'll say that they go, oh, the commercial, I bought $1 million commercial. It's only 10 grand a year positive. What's the point? Kind of thing. But then they'll go off and buy residential for $1 million. It's 35 grand negative. So you kind of like, well, yeah, it's not as positive now, but if we get rental increases, which is typically happening, the last few years we've seen 20 to 30% rental increases. If interest rates come down, you are laughing, like you are really good. And that's part of the long-term game. The cool thing is you can kind of predict rental increases as well, which will then therefore change your cash flow. But even at the moment, like if you've got a 30% deposit, $1 million commercial will pay itself up. It used to be 10 years, which was really cool, clickbaity, get a $70,000, $80,000 passive income in the next 10 years. Now it's about 12, 13 years with everything that's at where it's now. I still think it's going to come back to 10 because we've got way more interest in commercial, so way more buys, which should give us yield compression. And we can talk about that because a lot of people say commercial is valued based on the cap rate of the area, but you can still get yield compression. Interest rates come down, which therefore means we're going to actually make more cash flow, and we get capital growth. You'll have a really good time. So I can still see we're getting like solid for $1 million asset, a $75,000 to $90,000 passive income in the next 10 years.
There you go. Well, I mean, let's go on the journey and I suppose prove it. But a question's coming from Gurav, and I love Gurav. He loves his shares and his ETFs. But he said, "What about liquidity? How easy or hard is it to sell? And does it depend, Steve?"
Really, really good question. I got asked this today by a client. So 7 years ago, much harder to sell. So the typical days on market were much longer. I'm making up numbers here, but I think from memory, when I used to buy residential in like Logan and areas like that, it was like 30 to 40 days on market was a typical days on market for most residential. We're talking like 2018-ish, no, probably 2019, 2020. And then commercial was kind of 60 to 90 days. So it was kind of like 3 times as long sitting on the market. However, that's not the case. Because the market's really hot, anything with a solid yield and a good location in days, like it's it's snapped up. There's 4 or 5 commercial buyers agents that will jump on it straight away. So that's no longer the case. Do I expect that that's going to change? Yes. Things slow down. Interest rates go up. Interest rates go down. But it used to be about 2 to 3 times as long. And that was a little bit more scary for some people if they had to kind of offload quickly. However, this is one of the stats, and me and you were having a chat earlier today about data websites that people aren't talking about with commercial. When I first started this game like 7 years ago and I mentioned the word commercial to someone, they looked at me blankly like, what do you mean tenants pay the outgoings? What do you mean I get a 7% net yield? What do you mean I get like $30,000 passive income from the get-go? Like, they looked at me completely like I was an idiot and lying to them. Now I've been on this podcast, 7, 8 times. There's 3 or 4 books in the market. There's 4 or 5 podcast series. There's heaps of articles about it. I'd be keen, and I don't know the numbers, and that's why I'm not saying what the numbers are, to see what the transition are from normal mum and dad investors to actually commercial investors. My guess it's going to be literally 20 to 50 factor fold. So all of a sudden there's more, and we always talk about on these podcasts, supply and demand. The demand is actually going up 20, 30, 40, 50 times, which is kind of changing the game a little bit as well.
Just on that, how do you? There's just so many questions I keep popping into my head. And I saw somebody on a different forum today. Somebody's talking about buying or they're not talking about. They did buy a commercial asset in a regional sort of mining town called Blackwater, and it was at a 9% yield, and it was a 440K purchase. And I just thought, given that thing you said about the proliferation of education and more buyers agents enter the industry, what kind of questions, if people are going to go down the path of buyer's agent and for commercial, you probably should, and you're a sponsor, so you could say, but I mean, Resi, I love Joe, but you could probably do it yourself. But commercial's probably a little bit tougher. So how do you kind of feel about the types of things that people should be qualifying there if they're going to go down the commercial buyer's agent route or route?
I get asked by so many people being like, oh, Steve, can you mentor me for a month? I want to be a commercial buyer's agent, which even residential buyer's agents do. They go do like a course of how to be a buyer's agent, no experience being a buyer's agent, but they own 3 to 5 properties and they jump onto it. I'm weirdly one of those old school kind of mindsets, probably coming from engineering, that you go learn the craft formally first. And that's not just doing a quick online course. It's go work for someone, even if it's for a year, just to learn systems, processes, how it all kind of works. And that's what I did. So whenever someone says like, oh, I want to jump into commercial and be a buyer's agent, I go, cool. Start sending out your resume. Go work for someone for a year or 2, learn the craft, then go out and go. And I've got people in my team that I'm kind of mentoring, knowing that they might someday go out on their own. That's fine, but they're learning the craft. But going back to Blackwater, I actually know quite a few properties there. When I was at my last buyer's agency, they bought a few properties there, which I was actually personally very against, and sort of part of the reason why I've split off and kind of is I'm known as the boring low risk kind of investor that just gets good tenant, good capital city, low vacancy rate, versatile premises. I just do that. And I think it was a Subway and a Pizza Hut, or was it KFC? There was the little cheapy ones. And I didn't like it because the population was less than 20,000. And I was like, oh, this is and then I actually saw the property once I started my buyer's agency that they bought for, I think it was like 550 grand, advertised at 350 a year later because the tenant had left. And I was like, well, that's going to be vacant for a long time. So it depends what budget you're spending. This is where a lot of people fall over, and this might be one of the questions that comes up. I get people that are buying a $500,000 property and they say they want a 6% net yield, and they walk away from it if I send them a bulletproof 5.5% net yield, being like, oh, I don't want to touch that. It's $2.5 grand a year. So you've said no to a better quality asset with a longer tenant, probably a newer building with better depreciation, because you're chasing $2.5 grand. Like, for me, that's just a baffling thing to worry about. But people get numbers in their head. I'm not judging them. I was the same when I was a residential investor. I used to have the 6% number in my head, and then it dropped to the 5.5, then it dropped to 5. So I get the premise of it.
Well, and it's kind of like the age old where a property is under rented in residential, and it goes on the market and it's got an 8-month lease in place, and an owner occupier is not going to touch it. So, but the sort of investors sort of shirks, they're like going to miss out let's just say she rent for 500, so $100. So missing out on five and let's say less than $5,000 in that 8-month period. 8 times 5 is 45, so 4,500. And they can secure a discount on the property for probably 10 to 15K because no owner occupier is interested in it. And I think there's actually potentially some opportunity there. So, and maybe there's the same in commercial as well, but that's just interesting.
No,
let's get in this one.
No, hold on. I want to touch on that. That's a really good point.
Okay.
So some regional areas I love for residential, and they make perfect sense. And chasing a yield there, you can actually still get really good capital growth. So like there's a lot of buyers agents that kind of target that, like Simon Presley from Propertyology. He gives some good data around the regional areas and actually shows most of them outperform the capital cities. But it's actually way easier to analyze oversupply with residential because you can look at applications and go, okay, this is the amount of days on market, this is the vacancy rates, this is how much stock, this is what the population growth, and you actually correlate and go, okay, this is still going to be a safe investment. And I'm not talking about really, really mining towns. I'm talking about like the 50 largest cities of Australia. So residential can still be a really good market there, but commercial can still be really, really bad. And because you can saturate a commercial market much easier than residential. So you build another retail strip and it takes all the foot traffic away from your one. They build 20 warehouses and all of a sudden there's an oversupply of that market. So this is probably the main benefit of residential is you can look at a few key data points and make a smart decision. Commercial, there's so much to kind of understand. You got to understand the business, the economy there, how many industries are there, talk to town planners. Like you can't just go on some data websites and go, this actually looks all right.
Can I ask a potentially controversial, a really great residential market that I don't think is fantastic for commercial, Townsville. What are your thoughts? Do you like Townsville or as commercial, or do you dislike it?
Townsville has some of the worst stats for vacancy rates for industrial. So we don't buy there. And we see some people go and chase it because you can get a 6.5, 7% net yield, which looks attractive. But like for a warehouse, typical vacancy is 1 to 3 years. Like that's a long period to not have rent. I would much rather buy in, let's say, Brisbane. So let's go Brisbane and push for a 6% net yield because the vacancy rates are 1 to 3 months. You'll get better rental increases, better capital growth, and lower periods of vacancy. So your ROI is going to be much, much, much better. And I've seen this with my own portfolio. The stuff I bought, like the blue chip stuff that I bought back in the day where you could buy 7, 8% net returns, I was buying 6, 6.5. They're now 9, 10% returns because I've had rental increases, whereas the Townsville and those haven't had those much. So Townsville, the data's quite poor. Again, doesn't mean not to buy there. There's still markets within markets and little tightly held kind of areas, but you need to know what you're doing. But for me, like again, unless your budget is 2 mil plus, you start talking the difference of $5,000 a year. I'd much rather the security of the capital city, the diverse market, well encapsulated around residential. So that way they can't build any more supply. And then you can at least get some confidence in your decision.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I don't know if you might have, I'm sure you were around here. But what is the yield like before, Slow was asked, yield like before COVID? Is the current yield considered really good, hence main driving pushing demand? I see more and more people talk about commercial now. And we sort of answered that last little bit. It's because people have started to seek in cash flow. But yeah, what's the yield? What was the yield like sort of
pre-COVID, the good old days? So you could get 7% net yields plus. But that's not the kicker. The kicker was interest rates were like 3 to 4.5%. So this was back in where you could go buy $1 million property and actually have an instant $30,000-$40,000 passive income. Like it was ridiculous. Funny thing is, when I was buying properties back then, I was looking the 5 years prior being like, that was 9%. Why wasn't I buying then? Now we're buying 5 to 6.5%. And we're kind of thinking, is this the good old days? I say this on every podcast I go on. Buy when your finances allow and buy when you're educated. That's it. Like you're not going to pick the market. No. Have you met all these people we've interviewed on this podcast, Jeff? Have you met any of them that actually have got in and out of the markets every time?
No, definitely not. I mean, I'm sure that, there's not, it's almost impossible to pick the bottom and pick the top of each market. There's going to be that because particularly in residential, because in an owner occupied driven market, it's it's more about emotion, and you can't control what people's emotions and what they're going to do. The FOMO that kind of kicks in, or the desperation that'll happen when you think you picked the bottom, but people just don't want to buy because they're afraid that their property might go down further. They might lose money. So it's kind of it's a little less that way probably in commercial. But
yeah, that's one of the advantages, like you said, commercial. So remember the earlier question, how you said to something like, "Oh, it's not the same cash flow positive that it used to be," but having something neutral to positive in this market actually means you can weather as many storms as that comes. Whereas residential, if you pick it wrong and it's negatively geared, you've got to hold this asset, and you don't know how long. Could be 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year. Like lease commercial, you can actually hold it. You buy it and go, cool, it's paying for itself. Let's see how it goes. But again, that's part of the long-term mindset. Look at the asset and go, is this going to be in more demand in 10 years' time? The answer is yes. That typically means capital growth. Even if it doesn't, if you've still got a pay down strategy, you're still wealthier than the person next to you who hasn't bought, because it's the costs of goods and services. So if you've got that asset and the cost of everything comes down, proportionally, you're still better off because you own an asset that's covering your goods and services.
yeah,
that make sense?
It does. I probably need a bit of a whiteboard to unpack and need me to draw some pretty pictures. But no, what I was going to say was how do you, because that's when the economy goes bad, people say commercial is going to go vacant because businesses are struggling. People that still need a home to live in. How do you kind of think about that question?
I don't want to say it depends. It will change based on what you're buying and where you're buying. But on average, typically what happens when businesses slow down and the economy goes backwards is you don't get the same rental increases. So that might stop or stall or even go backwards a little bit if it's a really bad recession. Then the days on market are longer. Then the vacancy rates are longer as well. So that's doom and gloom. But certain things still survive. And this is actually why I like retail. Typically, suburban retail still does all right. People still need to go to the medical center, go to the dentist and get a haircut and things like that. They might not be as profitable and booming as they once were. They can weather storm. Industrial, though, vacancy rates are still ridiculously tight. Most capital cities, and you can, if you don't believe me, go on like CBRE, Savills, Knight Frank. They all do quarterly reports. You can just type in literally Q4 report, CBRE, vacancy rates, industrial, and it'll give you the report showing you take it with a grain of salt. It's for 10,000 square meters plus, but it gives you a bit of an indicator. We're still down at 1 to 2%. So even if it doubled, like a healthy commercial market is sub 7% vacancy rates. So like you're still going to be okay. But again, flip the question. You say the same thing for residential. Why are you going to have residential? If you've got a negatively geared asset, why is it going to grow if people are losing their jobs? People work in the premises. People work in commercial. They work in retail, office, industrial. They got to get earn money from somewhere. So the residential market's also going to take a hit.
I feel like we need another resi versus commercial debate again, but we've already done that once or twice. So Jeremy's popped in, and I want to get to, well, when should somebody consider moving from resi into commercial? So stay tuned. But Jeremy Ian Mazzelli, one of the biggest brains, and one of the, I mean, I won't say the thing I'm thinking about there. He packs a lot into that frame of young Jeremy. Love him. So he said, do you ever consider average yield over total lease term? Very rarely do people consider that. I might need somebody to explain it to me. Do you know what he means there, Steve?
Not really. I assume he's talking about when you've got the rental increases. So if you've got a 5-year lease and there's 3% rental increases per year, he kind of averages it out and looks at it over time. Personally, I don't. I look at today's data and then I'll generally forecast 5-10 years because things change anyway. Even if you've got a lease in place, if the if the rental increases accelerate over the market rate, and I've had this personally happen to me, the tenant comes back and says, I think I'm paying too much. And you typically give them the rental reduction back to where fair market is. So the market will typically dictate the outcome. But I know Jeremy does it for all the other reasons of tax and whatnot and forecasting, but I'm a bit more of a simple investor than Jeremy.
Yeah, he did say spot on, Steve. So I love it. So many questions. That's why we got to actually get to the context. We're half an hour in, Steve. We haven't even sort of really unpacked the layer. We might need a second thing. But okay, let's crack on to, well, what are the reasons, or what is the reasons that people should consider moving from resi into commercial?
All right, so this is something I say on every single sales call. When we start, basically after we have a bit of chit chat, I ask them 3 questions. What do you actually want to achieve? Over what time frame do we want to do it in? And what do our finances allow? And typically the finance one is what dictates the answer for most people. So most people just naturally in their head go, I've got 2 or 3 resis or whatever it may be, time to look at commercial, and they'll come because they're out of servicing for residential. So they can't service the negatively geared assets anymore. And they do it for that reason, out of necessity. Other people, and this is probably the other 40% of them, want to get a passive income because they don't like their job. Like maybe I have a bit of a tainted view because I get people saying this to me all the time, but most people don't enjoy working and they don't want to make life their work. So they're like, how can I get a 50, 100, 150, 200K passive income so I don't have to stress about work and I can go to part-time or do a passion project, things like that. So that's the first question. What are you trying to achieve? Is it a passive income? Is it to become a millionaire? Is it to pass properties on your kids? Is it to let you or your partner go on maternity, paternity leave when that comes around, or is it to quit your job? So that might guide that. The time frame is a good one because everyone's got a bit of a different plan. Most people are, oh, look, I'll stick out my job for 5-10 years. If it's a good length time frame, it means we don't have to do anything stupid. Like if they're like, let's do it in 5 years, I want a 200 grand passive income. We're not getting that from buying like $1 million commercial industrial asset that's 6% net yield. We have to do development and stuff like that, or look to a value add project and really do something aggressively. So kind of just marrying up all 3 of those, like what do you have to work with? What time frame? What do the finances allow? And then kind of go from there. The general answer is if you're looking to build a passive income quickly, commercial's the right thing to do. The real question is when not to buy commercial.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my next one, but I tend to agree. Like we talk about, well, what are the resources you have? Your time and your money. Like how long before you want to achieve that goal, and how much money do you currently have? Like what are those resources? What's your existing portfolio look like as well? Because that's a question we'll talk about. I'm back. But the thing when people sort of say, should I go straight into commercial upfront? How do you kind of tackle that? And that'll kind of lead into when you shouldn't invest in commercial, why you should.
I'm going to answer why you shouldn't invest in commercial because it actually kind of answers it in a better way than answering why you'd start in commercial, because that one kind of sells the dream a little bit too much. But why you shouldn't invest in commercial is when you're starting out, because you can get away with 90%, even 100% lends if you've got banker mum and dad for guarantees and stuff like that. If I've got the choice, so one of the negatives with commercial is at the moment you can get maximum 80% lend. So if I would rather, most of the time it's 70% as well. If you're out of servicing, it's actually lease stock loans and things like that. And it's actually more like literally a 50 to 65% LVR. But I would rather, if I was starting out, own 2 or 3 assets on 90% loan to value ratios and pay lenders mortgage insurance, than buy 1 or 1.5 commercials. Because if I do get the same capital growth, which I always argue that you do with commercial, you make 3 times more equity, 3 times more capital that you can put into a much larger asset. So that'll accelerate your portfolio way more. So that's the leverage. Like I'm not like Jeremy Nuazelli. Like I don't love property. I don't go to bed thinking about it. I use it as a vehicle because it gets me right. The reason I chose it as a vehicle was the banks let me play with big dollars. And that's why I started in residential. Also why I'm getting out of residential and just buying commercial and selling my Resi portfolio. So leverage is your friend. If you're uneducated and you're not paying a buyer's agent, that's another good reason, because whatever you think you can fall down on residential, times that by 10. There's way more steps to fall down with commercial. You've got lease review, contract review, tenant interviews, road and traffic analysis, vacancy studies, occupancy studies, like checking leases are registered, like competition analysis. Like there's all these other things you can fall down on and burn yourself. So if you're not educated or you're not paying someone to do it for you, stick with Resi, because as long as you don't do something silly like buying a flood zone or like have a big easement through the house but you were planning to do a development or whatever, you'll generally be okay. So education and finance are probably the 2 reasons not to buy it. I'll answer the first one now, why you'd start off in commercial. A lot of business owners do it as well because they might have a lot of capital And then the servicing, because they're telling Mr. Taxman they're not earning too much, but they can still buy 70, 80% commercials and looking for the passive income to transfer there. So they might do it. Other ones where like they might have, like I've had a few clients recently, like about 60 years old, where they've got like one investment property and a principal place of residence. And they're normally downsizing their principal place of residence and they sell the investment property. And then we've got a nice big budget to get a really low risk commercial and get 3 times the income. So as opposed to them retiring on 45 grand a year, they now get to retire on 130 kind of grand a year. So that's the purpose. But back to my 3 questions, that's the what are we trying to achieve? And the time frame is shorter. So we've got the short time frame. We can't do it by waiting for the Resi market to grow. Inversely, if you're a 20-year-old kid, go Resi, leverage up to the eyeballs, take the risk while you can, and then go from there.
Jeez, here we go. Speaking of all these terms, I just want to say this is general information only. Should not be. Go and speak to your accountants, your financial planners, and your mortgage brokers, and all those good people. So, general nature people. So, that's interesting you kind of say that because, yeah, what you're really highlighting there is the importance of considering what your strategy is, because that's the thing I fear that a lot of people, whether they go over a buyer's agent, whether they go over a course or do it by themselves, they just go, they go on FOMO, they go and buy the latest hotspot. They buy Rockhampton, they buy Rockingham, or they buy sort of Townsville, or they're starting to even consider places like a Darwin now. I'm not saying Darwin's a hotspot. Maybe far from it, but I'd need to do a bit more digging myself. But they go and buy that next big thing, not realizing that if you're buying in that area that's seen that significant amount of growth and the yields have started to come back as rents can't keep up. And so then you might see a little bit more growth, but then what happens when the yields rents don't grow and when the growth stops? So that person then has trapped themselves when they need that capital growth. So really consider what your time frame is. And if your time frame is 2 to 3 years, then yeah, maybe you need that quick sugar hit. So
the thing is, when you're starting out, this is a trouble. And like, I'm not judging these people. Like, I've bought a few duds in my portfolio as well, and I've 2,000 deals later. I'm still learning things now, which is baffling. When I tell people that, they kind of like, how? But like, you still constantly learn of better options. 4 years ago, we weren't even talking commercial, Jeff. Now we've had 10 of these things talking about it. So things change. The one that kind of traps most people is they'll chase the yield. They'll say, how many dollars per week is it cash flow positive? Like they're looking for that $20 where they could have got a nice solid capital city one for literally $70 or $80 a week negative. And then they're like, oh, I want that one. If that's the case, just go pack shelves at a supermarket, like literally one weekend every month, and you'll make up that difference. And at least you're getting a better quality asset long-term.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna start tagging these people in these. But so some of the other questions we'll get to, because is there anything else we should talk to around the reasons and how people should move into commercial? Because we're at the 40-minute mark, but I just want to make sure we're squeezing all that value from Mr. Steve Palise. But is there anything else we need to consider on when to move from Resi into commercial? Like, what haven't we covered, Steve? That we should have.
I'd say the main one is if there's no difference in borrowing capacity, then commercial is definitely worth looking at if you're looking to get a passive income in the next 10 years. I don't want to shatter everyone's dreams, and I know you and Joe are doing the 150K portfolio, which I'm going to cheekily ask you later what the outcome of that, how to get that is quickly, because I know what the answer is. But the main thing is if there's no difference in borrowing capacity, and you get the same you get 3 times the cash flow and you get the same capital growth, you need to assess why you're buying residential. And the answer can be, I'm not a experienced enough investor to take on that risk. That's fine. Then you go residential. But finance is typically one that dictates it. That, like, I've had times where it was one of Jeremy's clients, like I'll bring it up, but I won't say names. He had 0 borrowing capacity for residential and about $2 million for commercial. So
wow.
that decided it. Even if I thought residential was better for him, it doesn't actually matter. The finances dictate it. So marry those up. But if you're interested, just go to your broker. Make sure it's a good commercial mortgage broker. Don't go to a Resi one that's never done it, because they won't know how to do it properly. And ask them, what's my borrowing capacity for residential? What's my borrowing capacity for commercial? And then also look at what my servicing is for residential. And they're different numbers, as you know, because they might still have some room left in the tank, but they don't have the capital to get there. So it might not be the best option to go commercial in that regard. So just get them to look at it. And at least you've got option A, option B, option C. Then try to marry that up with what you're trying to achieve.
And it'll be very, as somebody who can speak with somewhat of an authority, being in the broking game, it will be very obvious if they don't know what they're talking about, because those commercial kind of loans are very relationship driven. So you really need to understand what each lender is doing, and it's a very different beast from residential as well, which is very much box ticking, whereas the commercial lending is very much a deal by deal, like a case by case, relationship based. Like they don't necessarily purely base on your kind of how much money you're earning, all that sort of stuff. They look at it more at the asset based, not always, but yeah, that's this is an interesting question come through from Jenny Mole. She does ask some very thought provoking questions, so keep them coming. From a risk perspective, thoughts on buying in high demand resi location with zoning that allows for either or with council commission. So I imagine she's talking about either resi or commercial. So kind of the ability, flexibility in that property. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Really, really good. If you can actually, that's actually a great question, Jenny. If you can actually get something that's zoned like mixed use for commercial as well, and it gives you the option to maybe turn it into like a salon or a medical center or a vet or something like that, you can really boost the value, because typically the commercial will sell for more. If you've got a veterinary clinic, you know, the house type ones, the ones that are converted houses, and it's next to a standard 3-4 bedroom house, that will sell for much more, 30-40% more. So if you can actually tie up a tenant and go from there. I actually read that question. I'll answer the way I read it though. I think she was saying, is potentially commercial a good asset in that location? If the resi market's going really well and there's huge demand, then yes, that's definitely worth looking at. Also, depends what type of commercial. Like obviously if it's next to an airport or something, a bit different. But if it's just suburbia and it's residential and there's like an industrial complex or retail, look at why it's in high demand. So if it's high demand because it's affordable and the incomes are allowing it, that will translate obviously to the tenants of the commercial. The hairdresser will also be on a higher income for that kind of area. And the warehouses will be able to, the car mechanics and fabricators and spray painters, they'll actually be able to afford it as well. So yeah, it's actually a really good indicator. Very hard to correlate, but I've actually seen from like just looking at properties for so long that it actually does correlate for at least some short-term rental increase.
Yeah, she said, "Thank you. I knew it. Should have bought that property." Haha. Well, I mean, in most properties that I've looked at and haven't bought, I looked at pretty seriously and haven't bought. I'm like, well, I look back in a couple of years' time, like, yep, that was one that kind of shouldn't have let through go to the keeper. This is a good question from Tony. What's a good starting budget for a first-time commercial purchase? And I know you're going to say it depends, Steve, but give us a.
No, I'm not going to say it depends.
Oh, you're not. Here we go. No more
500 grand will get you into a good quality warehouse with tight vacancy rates, or a little retail. And I can show one at the end. We bought a Subway for 700K, but we do buy them around 450, 500 as well. So you can get it like almost like a blue chip tenant retail or a little warehouse. The negative with the warehouse is it's smaller tenants. So you're getting like sole traders and things like that. They don't sign long leases. So don't expect a 500 grand one with a 5-year lease. The tenants are also more volatile. They grow and they move on, or they close up shop. So remember before I said on average you get like 5 to 10 years out of the tenancies? That one's probably more like a 3 to 6 years. So you kind of lose it that way. So 500 grand is a good one. As you shift up to like $1 million, then you start looking at more solid businesses with 3-year leases, 4-year leases, 5 leases. As you shift up to 2 mil, you start seeing more variety. You start seeing freestanding, really long leases, blue chip tenants, big fit outs, multi-tenancy, better value add opportunities. So you see more, and there's people that say don't look in those kind of smaller ends because there's too many buyers, you don't get a yield, they're going to go bust, etc. For me, isn't too many buyers a good thing? Like if I'm selling my residential and I've got an open home and 50 people turn up, isn't that a good indicator for capital growth? So I'm the small ones. My brother Jeff, who's head of our DD team, so he's seen close to 1,000 deals now. He bought a $500,000 warehouse in Perth, and his argument is, if I own 4 or 5 of them, happy days. I'm mitigating the risk that way. Me, without sounding arrogant, I don't want to own 4 or 5 $500,000 ones. I want to buy blue chip assets that I don't have to stress about.
Yeah, gee, Good old, yeah. I saw Jeff told me about that one. Now it's not me, by the way, but no, it's interesting, and I feel like the questions are absolutely rolling in, and I'm going to sort of prioritize the ones people are asking questions live. I do have a whole bunch in the trunk, but this is Brian Happ, and this one's probably so his experience. Refinance in commercial is easy but more expensive. Pay valuation is this normal? And you're not a broker, Palise. Sure, I tend to
I've
agree.
paid for many valuations. Yep. So one of the key differences, you can't just do a desktop valuation. You have to pay for a formal valuation, which is typically $1,200 to $2,000 for a simple commercial. So it's not as easy as just calling up your broker being like, oh yeah, can we get a valuation to see if there's any equity? You typically want to do that if you know that there's equity there. The good thing for my clients though is we know, because we're looking at that market all day, every day. And like my buyers agents, my team, their acquisition staff literally just look at the one city over and over and over. So they know that the equity's there. But you do have to pay that. The loans can be more expensive. They've got like loan establishment fees and things like that. It can be even 1%, 2% of the actual purchase price. So you sometimes have that. So it is more expensive. You won't just do it willy-nilly unless the market's really grown and you know it's grown. Or you've done a value add and you know you've got like more net lettable area or whatever it may be. Or once the new tenant signs, most of the time in my portfolio, you'll wait for the tenant to re-sign the new lease, being like, beauty, got a fresh 3-5 year lease. Let's go back to the bank and pull out the equity then. So you'll stage it a little bit. It's an annoyance, Brian, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, nice. It's I mean, there's just so many big questions that people have come through. I'm going to throw one up about SMSF, and I know you're not 100% an SMSF guru, but we'll let's see, because I think this is one that
Jeremy's still on. Jeremy, save me.
No, I think you'll be able to answer this one. But so I just put it up. Sorry, we put it up in the comments, and I tagged him, so he'll know we're answering this now. So he said, and I believe Kelly asked as well, what do you think about buying commercial via SMSF for the first property? And I'm just going to say, whether it's via commercial or whether it's via SMSF or individual company name, I don't know whether that makes too much. It might make a bit of a difference on servicing, maybe not. I feel commercial would be good for maintaining a net yield of 7% and higher. I mean, 7%, it's going to be a tough ask potentially. Similar returns on a typical super fund. But what do you think about buying commercial and SMSF, Steve?
Yep. So 2 questions. I'll answer the first one. What I think about buying in a self-managed super fund. Brilliant. If you're looking for a passive income, obviously diversification, etc. Talk to financial advisor, accountants, yada, yada, yada. But like for commercial, like most people want, if you buy residential, it's not going to get you the income that you actually want for your retirement. So commercial actually gives you a nice passive income. So perfect for the premise of I want to retire and not have to sell the asset. Great. You can build a really solid kind of passive income from it. The second part of 7% matching, and I saw you grimace a little bit, being like, oh, 7% sounds a bit risky in this market. It is, but you got to remember it's leveraged money. So you're not just like, you're getting typically 70, 80% leverage. So I wouldn't say go buy 7%. I'd go get a bulletproof. The only thing that typically changes when I'm looking for a property, when someone comes to me and goes, oh, I'm buying this myself and I super fund versus out. The only thing I do slightly different is I try to take on less risk with the self-managed super fund, because that's got to be a property that's bulletproof and performs, because you don't want to have to worry about it. So I'd generally argue, look, get a slightly lower yielding one, like a 5.5 to 6.2% one that you know is bulletproof. And you'll actually find, to answer the question, within a few years, because your super contributions are paying it down as well, and the rental increases, it'll actually be bigger than that 7% elsewhere. And then in the long run, once it's paid off, you'll actually make more because it was leveraged at 70%. So yeah, 6% now is leveraged 2.5 times.
I just want to say you can leverage in shares, because we get that comment, but yeah, the risk potentially on a more liquid asset, the shares, I would argue, is probably a touch more in shares. So yeah, whereas
you can get more diversification in shares though. That's the benefit of shares, and why people like it is you don't have to go and buy $1 million warehouse in your self-managed super fund. You can actually put it in whatever you want. So like I'm not anti-shares. Like, funny enough, I don't like saying this. I am not buying a property in my self-managed super fund because I don't own any shares. That is my diversification fund.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. There you go, Steve. I'm getting information out of you that we wouldn't normally get. Here we go. What have I done yet? So this is an interesting one as well, and I've got my, I suppose, take on. You say that it can grow. So this is Elijah again, who said, "Does commercial grow 20% in hotspot locations, or unseen or rare? I.e., does it grow the same as a hotspot residential?" What are your thoughts on that one, Steve? You're probably sick of that question, but I'll ask it anyway.
No, on average, it performs somewhat the same, and it typically matches inflation. So you're normally in that 5 to 6%.
Yep.
But as we know, properties come in cycles, so you get the highs and lows.
Yep.
The last few years, we haven't been getting 20%. We've been getting kind of 10 to 15% the last few years. That's sort of dying off now. So you can get 20% for a year, but it's not going to be sustainable.
Yep.
In regards to, I think there was a question, you took it down, was something about the residential market, if it happens there. Yes and no. So in the past, historically, the commercial market happened out of cycle with the residential market.
Yeah.
But that
Lag
was
sort of thing.
but that was also just because the attention span and people didn't understand commercial, and there was not as many people kind of. Now that people are educated, they're actually happening at the same time. Because people know now, they're saying, oh, Brisbane's taking off, I'm going to buy commercial there as well. They see it. They don't have that kind of like insecurity that's a bad market if they see the commercial growing. Where there's a difference for that is if you are buying a more newer area, and newer doesn't mean like out of city. Like I grew up in Sydney's west, like Kellyville didn't exist. If you asked me 25 years ago if I was looking at property then, would Kellyville, a warehouse in Kellyville, be a good buy? You'd be like, no, it's farmland. It's ridiculous. But that's also what happens out of cycle. They build the warehouses and there's no houses. So they build the warehouses to then build the houses. Then they build the houses and the warehouses go empty because they don't need the fabricators and the builders and all the machinery. Then the people need services like the car mechanics and the kitchen fabricators and the little Bunnings and and then they fill up. So that's why they sort of kind of happened out of cycle in new regions. But in well-established regions now, I'm pretty much seeing the same capital growth. I'm going to argue more's coming commercial because as the kind of fad dies off of residential, people chase the yield now.
And would you say that is what you experience and experiencing over in Perth with that recent huge boom in Perth? Did commercial grow relatively soon or at the same time, or is there still a bit of a catch up to play in commercial in Perth from what you're seeing?
No, they've all pretty much had the same. So most capital cities that have seen the kind of boom have done really well. Then certain ones that haven't performed well, commercial still performed really well. But again, it just happens in cycles. I always tell people you're not going to pick it in commercial, and then everything I say goes out the window depending on the type of asset you buy anyway. Because like if you're buying a little a little suburban retail strip like I've bought, who cares what the economy's doing or what North Brisbane's doing when I bought in Regent's Park, for instance? Like they're not applicable. I need to worry about that little bubble, and I need to look at the macro data about like average incomes, how much those incomes are increasing. Days on market in the Resi market. So it just depends. I hate saying that. I'm trying not to.
So Ben this question. Does a strategy require you to switch from Resi to commercial and not go back? Or does it make sense to buy Resi after you start buying commercial? So once you go commercial, do you never go back? Or can you kind of switch between the two? I like this one.
Yeah, I actually really like. I've actually never been asked that, which is really good. Most people just say, "When do I buy commercial?" They never actually say, "When do you go back?" Really good question. Yep. There's going to be different premises. I'm going to look at this. So most people don't, because they start seeing the value of commercial. Like the market's been very kind to most people in the last 10 years. So if you bought kind of anything, as long as you haven't done something silly, you've reaped the benefits. You've got way more income, same capital growth. Why would I go back to residential? There will be certain cases though, where if you do think like a recession's coming or something like that, or you've got an asset that's kind of done its dash and had its capital growth, and tenant might be leaving down the track, et cetera, you might go to the safest houses kind of strategy. The ones I've seen, and this is more rare because most people want the passive income, is they'll sell out to do a development. So they want to magnify their returns, and they really accelerate it, which is one of the questions I always get is, why would you sell a good commercial? Most of the time they're cashing out to move it into something bigger. The other ones I've seen is actually to help out family or fund retirement in a different way. So they want to buy like their holiday house in a location. So they're they're getting rid of the funds. Similar to how I'm selling my Resi to buy commercial because it fits my strategy. They're sort of doing the opposite, or selling out to give deposits to their kids, for their kids to buy houses. But most people, if you've gone down the commercial route and the capital is not your issue, i.e. the deposit, don't really go back to residential unless there's a purpose for it.
Yeah, nice. That's been an interesting one and well answered as well. Making you sweat. Look at this. So Lou, if you've got questions or comments, like drop them in. If you're even, so he said Lou said with 750K cash, what are the smart options to invest this cash? All into PPR and Lou, this is not financial advice, by the way. Go and speak to your accountant and broker and all those people, or rent vesting plus one large commercial asset, or perhaps split it down into 250K times free assets. Lou, it looks like you're after the strategy session with Steve. But no, I think if you go back to those free questions, but what do you reckon anyway, Steve?
No, let's break it down. So all into PPR, lowest risk option. Pay off that principal place of residence, but you are going to be relying for retirement on your super. That's it. That's you're not going to have any, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is, if you're very happy and content in your life, don't take on the risk. Definitely don't go and buy a commercial, because if you don't need the funds and your pension's going to cover you and you're happy there, cool, pay it down. Lowest risk option. If you want more than the standard superannuation that you're going to get, you have to do something. So we've got to start talking residential or commercial. Commercial, if we want the cash flow, I think he's got, going to assume the 250K is for 3 commercials. So he's not talking about buying residential. So 1 commercial or 3 smaller ones. The 750K, let's just divide it by 0.35. So 750, because I'm laying 30% deposit, 5%.
$2.5 million roughly?
2.15 or 2.14. So a couple mil. What I normally say to my clients is, tell me a max budget and tell me your preferred, and let's just look at everything under it, because buying a mediocre 2 mil is not worth it if you can find a cracking 1 mil deal, and then you can buy 2 1 mil and diversify the location, the tenants, the asset type. I think that question becomes a lot harder if we start saying, do I buy a 5 mil property or 5 1 mil properties? I think that because it starts to change what you can look at for 5 mil. But I just look at both. As I mentioned earlier, buying the smaller ones, the little 700K ones, the 3 with the 250K deposits, you're getting smaller tenants, more volatile tenants, more turnover, a few more headaches here and there. Whereas the bigger one, the 2 mil one, we're looking at freestanding, blue chip, longer things. So there's no right answer for that one. Based on your personal circumstances, I would say you get a lower headache property at the 2 mil, but you get to diversify with the 3 little ones. So I normally with those clients just say, let us look for anything under 2 mil. And if we find a 1.8, let's look at it. It's not like Resi, and this is where people fall over. I get people to come to me and they say, Steve, I want to buy a 1.5 mil commercial. And then you send them a 1.3 and they're like, oh, but I'm not maximizing my leverage. Cool. We might sit there for another 6 months trying to find something at 1.45 for what? Yeah. But residential, you can do that. You can pick your suburbs and medium house price, what they sell for. You can be like, cool, how's it sell for 1.2 here? Let's keep targeting here. Whereas we've got to look Australia wide, and the tenant changes, the value add changes, the age of the building, the size. There's no right answer with commercial. It's just, what do you like and don't like?
Yeah, that's right. And there'll be a lot more deal flow in residential as well, because there's generally a lot more stock that actually can tick the boxes. Whereas commercial, like you want to make sure that, because there could be any number of reasons you crash the deal in commercial. Like somebody he said, thank you. How good is that? Like I don't know many podcasts that can do this, but and this is hopefully a quick one. What is the usual management fee for commercial? Maybe it's not that quick, but is it quick, Steve?
3 to 6%. Like residential, they want to make a little bit more. Resi agents normally want to make 2.5, 3 grand kind of thing. Most commercials want to make 4, 5 grand, assuming like a typical lower price point. That changes obviously if you're buying a 20 mil one. It's not 6%. It's probably like 2-3%. They'll make like the management of my shopping center is 20 grand a year. So like, but there's lots of tenants, things like that. But they're doing lots. They're managing the center. They're picking up the bins and the gardening and the plumbing and the roof issues. And they're collecting all the rent. So, but a typical one tenant one, expect kind of 4 to 6 grand as a good service. You can get cheaper, but don't go the cheap one.
Yeah.
Fun fact, which most people don't know. A lot of the times in commercial, the tenant pays the property management, so it doesn't actually matter.
So how does that even work then? Though anyway, if the tenant's paying for, does the tenant have any veto kind of say in who the property manager is, or they just pay it? And
no, really not. So I mentioned my brother Jeff before, and he's property manager. Well, how much do you want me to charge him? And he's like, well, this is a weird conundrum. Do I charge a lot and take the piss a little bit, or do I charge something fair? We end up charging something fair.
Of course.
But that's one. But again, you're still going to consider the net yield. Like if you go in and charge a stupid one, they're going to get upset. They're humans. They're not idiots. Like just best is to treat people right.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, there's still a few more questions, and we will let's look at what your favorite deal for this year, one of your favorite deals, and so I think that'll be interesting.
Okay.
So if you have, we got to throw to our sponsor, which happens to be Steve. But no, get those questions lined up, and we've still got probably half an hour or so. So bring them along, team. Loving this.
The amazing thing with commercial property investing is that in most cases, it's cash flow positive from day one, which means that you can drive those profits towards paying down the debt. There are instances with commercial property investing where you can actually have the property pay itself off over 10 years, which is absolutely crazy. With commercial property, you get massive net yield, so you can expect anywhere between 6 to 10%. And as we've seen in the current boom, these properties not only provide large cash flow, they do certainly grow wildly in value too. Now, with big rewards comes some risk, and this is why you should de-risk your investment as much as possible. And the way you do that is with expert due diligence. And this is why we highly recommend people hire professionals to help you along in your investing journey. Steve Palise of Palise Property is one such expert. Being a chartered mechanical and structural engineer in a past life, Steve draws on his analytical and mathematical skills to do that expert due diligence for you. With 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He's the guy you want in your corner, crunching the numbers and finding the best properties in the best locations, along with ensuring that you avoid the mistakes. Steve has actually even written the book on commercial property investing in Australia, and not only is it a bestseller, I believe it to be the most comprehensive in commercial property investing on the market today. He's been generous enough to give us a massive discount for our audience of 50%. So use the code OZPROP, click the link below, get a copy today, and start learning and getting on your commercial property investing journey.
I think it's still actually free, but no, it is a great little book, and you've got a couple. I think we need to reshoot that footage. You look a little. You look very young now.
Go on, Jeff. Say what you want to say, Jeff. What are you going to say? I look a little grey, a little bit older, more weathered.
It's okay. Nothing wrong with greys, but no. So what I've also done sneakily, I put a link for. So this is still free. I don't know how long he's going to do it for, but the commercial property course, which I think is the best. There's not a heap of them out there, but it on the market. I don't know how many commercial. It is one of the most comprehensive. So check this one out, people. It is a fun little course. It's currently free, so I can't promise how long it'll be free for.
No, free forever. Jump on. It's not little. It's 10 hours. You got to watch my ugly mug for 10 hours. But we cracked over 10,000 people have done the course now, which is really cool.
Wow, 10,000. How good is that? So let's just see. The question, and we'll get to that deal, but keep throwing your questions. So Land Farmers asked, cap rates are not always available. Or I mean, that's I suppose a question rather than a statement. What do you do in that instance? So I suppose it's a double barreler. Are they not always available? And if they're not, what do you do?
Yeah, there's no website you go on and be like, what's the cap rate of this area? The cap rate changes also for typically the type of tenant, the size of the premises, what it is, and things like that. But once you've found a property, you just have to do some due diligence. So you got to try to find some stuff that's sold. what I think they might be getting to is normally when you find a sold price, that actually doesn't tell you what to rent for anyway. So unless it was advertised as a tenanted property, you don't get that. The quickest and easiest way is actually just ask the agent who's selling the property, can I have some comparable rentals? Don't trust it. He's going to sugarcoat it and give you the best ones, but at least gives you a starting point. The next step, if you then think you're interested in the property, is call a property manager in the area, and they'll actually just tell you the square meter rates, and then you can go through. And I can show it on some of the deals when we get to it, of like, you got to look and find the comparisons. But just talking to someone on the phone is the quickest way of doing it. Just call a property manager. Hey, what's the square meter rental rate for XYZ? What's the size of the property you're looking at? Cool. Times it by that. That's the rent. Work out the cap rate based on purchase price.
Yeah, and I think that, yes, whilst you can look that up in residential, I think it's a similar thing that you should be doing. You should absolutely be so verifying with a property manager to make sure and get as much information as you can about that Resi asset. But it's probably a little bit more involved in commercial. So this is an interesting one come through again from Brian, and I've got another one. So this is more about locations as well. So he says, why is the yield in Victoria so poor?
Could have something to do with the state being in more debt than the rest of Australia. I imagine the economy is really, really poor there. Bad sentiment in the market as well. Oversupply in some areas. Weirdly, like you've mentioned Darwin and stuff like that, I'm keeping a very good close eye on there for certain types of commercial, because whenever no one's looking, there's some opportunities there. If I was to buy that, I might do a value add, and one of our clients does that. They buy warehouses, put mezzanine floors, revalue the property because they're not competing and paying a premium. But it's probably just got to do with the economy there. I don't pretend I'm an economist. I let all the smart guys talk about that. I just keep the numbers simple.
Yeah, if you want to look up, I know CBA has a great report that I believe they do once a quarter. It's state of the markets. So yeah, I might have to do a bit of a thing on that. So and this one is also a location based one. Are you seeing more demand for commercials in South Australia and the ACT, given that there is no stamp duty on commercials? And I think there's something about Victoria as well, isn't there? Isn't there? Victoria announced something recently about commercial and stamp duty, didn't they?
Yeah, you can kind of plan it over 10 years and stuff. But to answer the question, no, I get asked about it a lot. People buying there, not so much. The two reasons why people probably don't buy there. Yes, there's no stamp duty, but the yields are quite poor. So you try to buy like a warehouse. We buy in Canberra quite a lot. Adelaide, not so much. You start talking sub 5%. So you go, yeah, I'm saving on $1 million asset. I'm saving 35 grand. But I'm losing 10, 15 grand a year because of that decision. The other thing is the Adelaide agents really don't like due diligence clauses. So they want you to go unconditional. No, they want you to go unconditional from the get-go. So it's like Sydney used to be the same as well. And to be honest, most Sydney agents as well, there's too many buyers that are uneducated that will just buy it and go, oh yeah, it's a warehouse, I'll buy it, and don't need the 14 days due diligence. So most of the time I have to walk away because there might be a really good asset, but I'm not going to spend 10, 12 days doing due diligence on a deal I don't have secured. It's never going to be profitable as a business. I don't have the time. My staff don't have the time. If you're an individual investor and you do have the time to do that, cool, there might be some opportunities there, but you're offsetting the yield return with kind of there. Canberra's a good spot though. We're buying a handful of properties every month there, some good opportunities. But be careful where you're buying. Canberra turns into the sticks and the bush very quickly. So it depends where you're buying there.
Where's the bush in Canberra though, Steve? It's only a little I mean, as somebody who's spent a little bit of time in Canberra, what do you consider the bush in Canberra?
Not high density population. This turns out to very dry grass around it.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. I was it's not a very big location. So Ben has asked this one. Let me just go back. Oh, I had it up. He said he's asked it twice. So I personally, I mean, just to be honest, I wasn't all that interested. It was a very niche question, but good on you for asking it twice, Ben. So I'll give it up. So he said, do you think every single sale requiring a withholding clearance certificate will affect the market at all? So imagine this is a regulatory or legislative change, Steve. Are you across the withholding clearance certificate?
Not really. So
Looks like
you
a
might
no.
have to explain that a little bit more. I've been, I need my brother
Yeah.
on. I need my due diligence team on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, Kushal has mentioned here. I love this one. You've got plenty of examples here. So he said, "What are the most value add strategies in a commercial property? A lot of people do resi flipping for a living. Is there anyone doing that in commercial? Like, have you seen
Yeah,
that?"
most of the big boys are doing it. So like that's where you make some really good money because you get the holding costs and then you get the value add. This is the cool thing about commercial. So anything you can do in resi, you can do in commercial. So typically like a renovation, for instance, can't do that on a warehouse, but you can do it on a retail shop. So if you get a bit of an ugly duckling, you can kind of spruce that up. Most resi developers, unless you're really experienced, are doing a subdivision, a renovation, or maybe a small townhouse complex. So you can still do that in commercial where you might buy a warehouse and there's some spare land. There's lay down yard and you build another warehouse. So you can kind of do it that way as well. Then you've got all the creative stuff as well. So you can do internal. And one of the questions before is about cap rates. If you can increase the net lettable area, i.e. the space, like building mezzanine floors and things like that, you can increase the value that way. Then there's even more creative ways. We've got places where I can even show you one of the properties like advertising boards on it, telecommunications on top, ATM machines, like post like different tenants. You can have a nighttime tenant. So we've seen ones where they do like university studying classes at night and it's an office during the day. And like, so you can get two tenants that way. Breaking a big warehouse down into smaller tenants gets a higher square meter rate for a smaller premise than a big one. So to answer the question, there's lots of ways to do it. And most astute investors do it. Most of my team own commercial and they're doing it in commercial. There's a couple guys doing developments. I've got Andrew Bean who does the self-storage. Liam's, I think, putting a mezzanine area in one of his properties. So you can do it. You can do it to accelerate it. People like me who just want to park my money somewhere and keep traveling the world like I'm doing now, I don't even bother with it.
Yeah. That's no, and I love that mezzanine. Was it 800K you made in a weekend? I know that sounds super clickbaity, but it was 800K in a weekend, wasn't it? With a mezzanine floor.
Yeah, there was a little bit that was to build the structure, and then I think it took another 2 weeks to build like the office fit out. But effectively, if it was a storage mezzanine area, they turned it into an office space. But it doesn't take long to knock up a mezz floor. It's literally some beams and some flooring, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. Janet, you may not have seen, so I'll bring this one up. It's an interesting one. And I think it's going to come back to the free questions, which, so watch the whole, I suppose, thing. But is there any unique insights that you'd add to Janet's question for a 30-year-old couple who's $3 million? Well done, by the way, Janet. That's a great portfolio.
I'm literally thinking that you are, like, because of your age, guys, you're probably in the top 0.2% of Australia. Like that's ridiculous. Well done.
When would now be a good time to transition into commercial? So I suppose it comes probably the key one there, Stephen, disagree me if you want, would be the time frame. Like how quickly do you want to transition? Because I mean, they may be tapped out for borrowing. I don't know too much about, but what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so we mentioned before about talking to a broker and finding out resi capacity first commercial. I'm going to assume that they don't have any kind of cash reserves. You're not going to be able to get much out for a commercial. Even if you re-leverage that portfolio up to say 80%, that 5% over a few mil, probably not enough to get into like a big commercial. I'm not saying against it, but again, it's going to depend on your servicing for residential. If you still got servicing for residential, waiting for 5 to 10, 15% capital growth of that portfolio means you can get into another larger property with residential. So again, unless there's a short-term goal, they might be really kind of good business owners and they want a passive income so they can do what I did and leave work at age, like, 34 and travel the world for a few years. They might want that. And then yes, commercial definitely is right for them.
Yeah, it's it's kind of, it feels like the world's almost your oyster if you've gotten to that stage at 30, and maybe they're sort of about to have a family, so that could, there's, I suppose, options for them to consider.
If they don't do something silly or buy a really big house that puts financial stress on, they are going to be okay for the rest of their lives. They can just keep working a job that they really enjoy, and if that property portfolio doubles every 10 years, 3 is going to go to 6 mil, 6 is going to go to 12. They're going to be in a really strong spot because they've got the biggest thing on their side, time. Like don't underestimate. That's like me and you both had the same reaction. When we saw 30 years old, I was like, my first thought was, you guys are set. Like most people get that when they're 40, 45, and they can only get the 10, 15 years of compound. You've got another 30 years of compound growth. You guys are laughing.
Fingers crossed. And see, this could be a nice. Rick has asked this question. This could be, if you want to show us some due diligence, Steve. What are the key due diligence points for commercial? So, who would love to see an example of one that? Here's one that Steve prepared earlier. If you could bring up your screen.
Let's do that. I've pulled up a couple things down. Let me just grab some stuff. All right, cool. Let's do that. All right, and then I'm gonna do some.
Not enough pause, Steve. You're supposed to let people say, "Yeah, I want to see it," but that's okay.
Nah. I'm gonna show you guys. Speed. You can download this as me selling myself. Go on PaliseProperty.com. You can download the whole checklist for free in the resource sections. So go on the website, get this. This is everything we've got to check. I've actually pulled up a few properties. So I won't just show you one. I want to show it for a reason. Here's the subway we bought for $700K in Logan Home, which most people know Logan fairly well. It used to kind of a hotspot 5 years ago. I've personally got a property in Eagleby and Waterford West there. $700K. We used to give like an 80-page report. So you can see us ticking off all the stuff that we've checked from this due diligence report. However, we actually found a lot of people getting overwhelmed with getting so much information. So now we've actually got an online portal where we give the information so it's a bit more digestible. So you can actually go through and go, okay, I want to check the overall summary. I want to download the documents for the site because there's a lot to it. It looks a bit more digestible. This is one I specifically kind of want to pull this up. This is the stuff that you need to check on a commercial. So this is a standard commercial. Like, look at all the documents you got to check. And most of them actually have like quite a lot of files. Oh, that's a bad example. Most of them have got like 5-6 files in them. There's a lot of files to cross-check. Like it's not, you don't do that with residential. You do your building and pest, you do your data kind of to analyze the area. There is so much to check. So we created like an online portal. So this is what the client gets. So I'll show you this one because it's a bit easy for the thing. This is a big warehouse complex, but it's a big expensive one. It's a 9.3 mil one, but it's 6 tenants and it's about a 6% net yield, but the rents are actually under by about 20%. So this is going to end up being around a 7.4% in a year or two. So you can get stuff like that. But then I didn't want to just show this one because people go, I don't have that type of money. So then I just grabbed it. Well, I've showed they got the little cheap kind of subway just to kind of show that of like, oh, you can get a little retail. You can buy probably one of these. These will probably be between 500 and 800K as well, like the warehouses here. But this is the type of stuff I like. So this is Canning Vale, suburb south in Perth, where you get your 6.5% net. But for a couple mil, you getting 2 leases because it's 2 tenants. Let me just pull up a photo. It's probably the easiest one. So you actually get the two tenancies, which mitigates the risk because if you lose one, you can still handle the mortgage for the 1 to 4 months or whatever it may be the vacancy is. And then still has some value add opportunities for extending mezzanine areas and stuff like that. So, but just to give you an idea, like you got to do all this stuff. And this is the compressed online portal one. You got to check all that, but go on the website. Literally, you guys know me. I give all the information away. When you find a property, just go through all this and just tick it off. You got to do stuff like look at the property, OH&S, service contracts, look at the value add opportunities, research the area, talk to town planners, look at zoning, get all the documents, check the rental ledgers, the P&L statements, analyze the business, talk to the tenant, review the lease, go through that, get and pay for a formal lease review from a solicitor in addition to you checking the lease, look at fit out clauses, make goods, double check insurances. That's a big one as well. Still send the building and pest inspector, get body corporate reports, look at special conditions, yada, yada, yada. So a lot more to do, but like you said, like 100K passive income from a $1 million, $2 million property in the next 10 years. Happy days.
Yeah. Does that cover off your favorite deal? Like, what is your favorite deal you've let's go for a deal. And I've kind of given a roundup of people. So probably got time for 1 or 2 more questions. So if you're watching now, if you have a burning question that we haven't answered, if you put it in again, I'll do my best to get back to it. I do have a couple lined up if we don't, but yeah, you'll have time for 1 or 2 more questions. But do you want to share that deal and why you like it so much, Steve? Or just share.
So I'll pull that back up. So it was actually one of these, and there's two reasons why I like it. So
and probably maybe make it a bit bigger. So that's what I was saying, is in like make the screen bigger, not the deal bigger.
Yeah. All right. Let me have a look. So this is the big bopper we just settled on. So it's like a whole industrial complex. So you can see it's got the yep. But there's two reasons. So funny enough, this is one of the risks with commercial. We actually, because we had to extend due diligence and things like that, because there was some stuff we kind of need to check out. All of a sudden, we satisfied due diligence, and then the actual seller's conveyancer came back and said, "Oh no, we're not accepting that. We're crashing the deal." And then we were just like, "This is very strange that they're trying to crash after we've just satisfied." Anyway, we pressed on because we're like, "No, this is good property. We're going to buy it." Seek legal advice. Our conveyancer actually spoke to a barrister. This is kind of how far down the rabbit hole we got, and been like, "We want to buy this property. It's a good property. We're not letting them crash." And we found out afterwards by the agent, they got offered over $1 million extra. So it was 9.3 unconditional cash offer. So the seller was actually trying to get us to crash it because I would have made $1 million more. So I like it because we actually bought really, really well. Then we're also got the 20% rental increases coming, and you diversify it that way. But it's not a development play. Most people think I like the really creative development ones. I like the low risk ones where I never have to worry about it being vacant for the rest of my life. But this was a really cool deal. Then obviously, like my
is the reason that you were that there was somebody else that found out about it is in commercial real estates, they can sort of, I suppose, be multiple agents working on the deal. Is that how, or just the agent kind of presented to somebody else at the same time? Like
yeah, I'm weird to say now that I've showed the deal, I'm probably sorry. After the deal was done, they told us because there's no more benefit to them getting the higher price. But that's right. Actually, probably a good point to bring up with people. Be aware, one of the risks with commercial is, so you go into contract and it's subject to due diligence and it's subject to finance. Yep. If you ask for an extension, so you can ask for an extension, they can actually say no and crash the deal on you. You don't have any right. Yep. So the fact that you've even asked for it means they can crash it, which is a hard thing, is actually quite a lot, because in a hot market, we're finding they're getting a lot of cash buyers. And if they come in and someone signed a contract, even if it's $50,000 more and it's unconditional contract, if you ask for an extension, they're going to crash it on you. So we quite often have agents being like, "Hey, if you ask this extension, it's going to crash," which is hard because sometimes we don't have a file that we want, or the lender hasn't came back to us in time, and we have to make some tough decisions sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting, that sort of situation. So you're still seeing a lot of cash purchases out there from the sounds of it.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that makes me realize a lot of people still have a lot of money.
Yeah, which is why we may not see interest rates go. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of businesses and people that are. There's, I suppose, a couple of different sort of segments of people. Some people still have a lot of cash, and some people are strapped for cash. So 2025.
I've got a bit of a skewed view because if someone's strapped for cash, they're not reaching out to a buyer's agent like me. I'm only seeing the ones that have wealth. So I've got a bit of a skewed view, I think.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of pain, but there is still those people who have. 2025 is going to be an interesting year in property. Brian has asked another cracker, since I think this will be absolutely value for everyone. Pros and cons of buying a vacant month-by-month lease versus a lease property. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I'm surprised nobody's. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Steve?
All right, so there's three ones there. First one, I love vacant properties, and one of the misconceptions when I present a deal to a client, most people look at the lease. Is the first thing they look at. They'll look at a photo and go, "Oh, is this a nice warehouse or whatever it is?" Then they'll look at the lease and they'll be like, "Oh, I want 3 years. I want 5 years." This is going to sound really flippant and arrogant. I actually don't care how long is left on the lease. Because if there's 12 months left or there's 18 months left, unless it's a lease doc loan and I need the lease and then we're not sending it to them anyway, if they leave in 3 years' time or they leave in 18 months' time, they've still left. Like, whether or not you have a vacancy in a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years, it's the same net result. So I always spend my focus on the demand of the property. What are the vacancy rates? The ones that did go vacant, how long they're vacant for? What's the likelihood of rental increases? So buying vacant or buying a short lease doesn't actually bother me. There is some particular things we need to talk about with vacant though. Vacant, you don't have the servicing for finance. So you need really good servicing to be able to fund the purchase. So you need that. It wipes off lease stock loans as well completely. So it's just you need the servicing, which generally means you need a big deposit. You need like a 30, 35, 40% deposit, sometimes 50% deposit to get the deal done. Then you've also got GST because it's not a going concern. So there's 10% extra you've got to pay. You do get that back. So you'll get that back in your first BAS statement. However,
you got to come up with it though.
It's a lot of skin in the game. You need for $1 million purchase, like with stamp duty and stuff, you start talking 550 grand. Like it's great. It's a good one where you'll do it if you've got the cash, get the tenant in, assuming you're buying under market value. So you buy it like a bit cheaper, 10% cheaper, then go get it tenanted, then refinance and pull it out. However, most people think vacant properties are cheaper, which they used to be, but in certain markets, there's actually a bigger demand for owner occupied deals, which flows on to his next question about the month to month. So that's actually why you'll find a lot of properties when you find them for sale, the tenant will be on a month to month, not because the tenant doesn't want to be on a month to month. They want to be able to advertise to two people, investors like me and owner occupiers, because they want to get a good rate. But the month to month doesn't bother me as much because part of my due diligence is I talk to the tenant anyway and I find out, cool, what would it take to get you to sign a proper lease? If they say they're going to leave, you take that into account with your negotiations. And then the tenant one is just the bulletproof one. In an ideal world, you want a long lease, a good tenant, a good fit out, yada, yada, yada. But you're not going to find that. You're always going to find issues. But I think I've kind of covered all three of those.
Yeah, pretty well, man. Before we wrap up, I want to know what is the question that I or the audience should have asked you that we haven't asked, Steve. You got to think back through all the questions. That's a tough one.
What you should, I think what I've just said is probably the most repetitive thing I say when people are shocked by. I just mentioned how I actually don't care who the tenant is unless the value is in the tenant. So if you're buying an industrial, the tenant shouldn't make a huge difference to it. If you're buying a retail, 100%. If you're buying an office space, probably not as well, unless it's a big lease as well. So I always just try to encourage, look at the investment and say, in 5 or 10 years' time, are there going to be more people interested in this investment? If the answer is yes, cool, you're probably onto a winner and go from there. But it's a bit of a cop-out answer, so I'm trying to think of a better one for you. Keep the questions coming. I'll let it percolate for a little bit.
That's all right. That's all right. I was going to say that's somebody's complimenting me. They said that's a cracker question. About what question should we have been asking? One thing that
it's Greg. It's Greg.
He loves it. Good old. One thing that I was very interested in this. Are you seeing more purchases for commercial in the SMSF space at the moment?
Yep. So probably 1 in 3 of our purchases are self-managed super fund kind of purchases now. Again, increasing. But I think that's just more to do with education. So there's more people are doing courses and reading my books and the competitors' books and all looking at that. And then also disenfranchised a little bit with how their shares are performing, and they want a bit more control that way. But I am seeing more of it. Again, it's a tainted view from me because I live in a little substrate of the market where people have money. So I kind of get a bit of a skewed view. But yeah, it's gone up. It used to be probably 1 in 5, and now it's 1 in 3.
Mate, you obviously missed out on Nvidia or the latest meme coin. Like, there's people out there making a lot of money in different asset classes at the moment. But yeah, But no, so have you thought about what that question that the audience or myself should have asked? Is that the one that you were percolating, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, I got nothing. You put me on the spot. Too late,
That's
Jeff.
okay.
I've got an 18-month-old that's not sleeping.
Oh no, that's no fun. That is no fun at all. Well, for the audience that have tuned in, I want to say, if you've gotten value from this, I want to see and
Joe Tucker's on, Jeff. Joe's watching. Hi, Joe.
What? He told you he could have been on the session. But if they want to know how and when to move into commercial, like, share this with people and drop us a 5-star. If you've gotten value from this, hit subscribe, do all that good stuff on whatever your favorite listening platform is. But Steve, I want to know, if Joe has asked, if people want to get more Steve Palise, there is a lot of Steve to go around. Maybe I shouldn't say it, phrasing that way. How do people get more Steve Palise in their lives?
I've made a massive active choice to like push socials with videos and stuff. And like you mentioned, my YouTube now, I post really long form stuff. The course is a good one. Like it's literally 10 hours and everything, all the documents and files and cross checks and spreadsheets that we use. If you want to watch my ugly mud for 10 hours there, if you want to chat with me, as everyone can probably attest in this group, I talk to everyone. So just give me a buzz or shoot me an email, steve@paliseproperty.com, or find me on socials, and yeah, we'll have a chat.
And Steve, I want I'm going to hold you because I promised free straight sessions. So that frozen.
I heard strategy session.
We're back. So what I was going to say, I'm going to get, I'm going to get you to pick those free. And I'll make the connection so that, and then I'll send them that calendar invite that you've got. So no, this has been an amazing session, mate. Like for anybody looking to make that transition, and you've even helped, you've strategized with a couple, you've shown deals. Man, I don't know. I think this has been probably one of the, and I don't say this every time because Joe, this has probably been the best session we've done. Maybe we need to do it. Do I? No, I don't.
No,
I think
I
really
like I like the live Q&A format because you don't get like polished answers. You can kind of like talk back and forth a little bit, and then people can ask sub questions from it. So I think we do another one of these later on.
Yeah, I want to do how to make 150K passive.
I've got a question.
If you want to see that, then let us know. Drop a.
Yeah, I want to ask that to finish it off, Jeff. Like, you know how you and Joe are working on your $150,000 passive income. When do you think you're going to bring commercial into that, or if you're going to bring commercial into that?
Oh, I'm keen. Joe and I butt heads on it somewhat, so I can. I mean, to me, I don't think it'll be 2025. I think it'll be around the 2026, 2027 mark, a bit further down the path, because I think to get to that 150K, if you sort of, I mean, you can argue that commercial grows in the same sort of lockstep as Resi. I think that for us who want to build that base as much as we can, so it probably won't be next year. I think 2026, 2027, but let's kind of see. We sort of do have discussions, and sometimes I get a touch, not super heated, but they're productive conversations and discussions on it. Here we go. David, can't get enough of the Palise. He's asked a good question. So did I answer your question? Not next year, 2026, 2027. Do you need some more clients, Steve? Is that why you want to know?
If you want, I never say no.
Gee, never say no. So I just wanted to finish off on this. I can't finish on that one. So David has asked, when does it make sense to go commercial? Can you do it with $1 million asset, or better to start out when you have good equity for $4 million? We kind of answered that earlier.
Do you
want to give us the summary of what you said earlier?
If you can get into a $1 million asset sooner, that's better than waiting for a $4 million asset. The same premise as residential, though. Like when people say, oh, do I wait for a larger residential or not? You buy when you can afford, because typically the growth is going to outgrow your savings. So you get into it that way. And then you stage up as well. Like my first commercial was, I think, 430 grand. I bought a cafe in Ipswich because that's all I could afford. I'm not going to go back and buy another 400. You scale up, and to the point I might even sell that. Like, and I mentioned, like, I'm selling my residential portfolio and transition into commercial because I'm more interested in cash flow now than I am capital growth. And shouldn't say capital growth, more interested in that than having a large portfolio and building the portfolio. I'll probably even sell that one at some point, because that's debt free now. That property, that rent gives me 45, 50 grand a year passive income because it's debt free. I'll probably sell that and then put it into a really big blue chip asset where I can kind of sleep easy at night.
Yeah, that's sleep at night factor. Yeah, so it kind of answers. Oh, gee, the questions just keep rolling. I think we might have to.
I thought of my answer that people didn't ask. The sleep at night factor is a big one, and a lot of people say I only want to buy assets where I can sleep at night. Not buying a high risk asset though and making money, if that's what you want to do, you won't sleep at night then, because you would have thought back of, I should have done this. I should have bought this asset. Why didn't I try a bit harder? Why didn't I take on a bit more risk? So a lot of people always say to me, I want the sleep at night factor. I can tell you, like, I've got a big portfolio now because I took stupid risks as a young person. I really gambled and was living on, literally had to ask my dad for $1,000, $2,000 here and there because my portfolio got too big and the maintenance bills were killing me. So you can also have the not sleep at night factor for having a job you don't like and the wealth that you don't have.
Yeah, wow. I don't know, mate. I think we should finish on that because that is absolute wisdom and gold. So really appreciate. Thanks for coming on, Steve. Good fun as always, man. It's like just at the function on Friday night with the lawn bowls, just having a good chat. So on that note, let's go and move from Resi into commercial property. So
let's go buy commercial property.